Hello, this is Antonio Moore coming to you today from Tone Talks. I'm here to talk to you about a topic that really has been on my mind with this 2016 election, and I feel like it's really just gotten poor coverage by most of the media in terms of the democratic process as far as the primaries go. I mean, as a whole, this has been one of the more interesting election processes of my adult life. And the thing about this election that really has bothered me, both on the Republican and the Democratic side, is the power of the establishment, and we see that in true form on the Democratic side about the superdelegates, and that's the true purpose of this video. But we've also, to be fair, seen it on the Republican side with how the establishment really tried to push Donald Trump out, but they just didn't have the tool. And that tool that the Democrats have is the superdelegates. And we haven't been honest about the superdelegates and what the superdelegates did to basically slant the election from the very beginning. You know, right now, much of the media is reporting this thing in a very supposedly unbiased way, saying, well, she's ahead in pledged delegates, meaning Hillary Clinton, and he's behind. I think that right now she's at about like 1,700 plus, and he's at 1,400 plus. But what they're failing to be honest about is not only the purpose of the superdelegates, which I'll explain in a second, but from their very creation, like when they were made, but also more importantly, the fact that what happened was superdelegates were awarded, can be awarded any time, and they were awarded so early that they affected the entire pledged delegate election, particularly when it comes to African Americans. African Americans looked at this thing, and this is from personal conversations, as though he had no chance. And the reason he had no chance, let's just get honest, is because of superdelegates. Hands down. When you look at the pledged delegate vote across the process, it kind of split quite evenly, and then it started slanting heavier and heavier her way. If we start, and I'm going to run a video as well, just so you can get a clear visual of the data.
Last night was an astounding victory for Donald Trump, and this Saturday right here in South Carolina is going to be exciting for the Democrats. Looming over all of that, though, one of the busiest days in all of American politics, Super Tuesday. That is just 6 days away. 595 delegates up for grabs. That's on the Republican side. For the Democrats, it's 878, a massive haul. The outcome could really define this race. Now, before all that, today, the fight for South Carolina's superdelegates is definitely on. If you look at the voting in the first 3 states, the pledged delegate count is a virtual tie, 52-51. That's our NBC News count. But as a separate matter, if you were to add in these unpledged or so-called superdelegates, which are tallied up later eventually at the convention, Clinton's lead jumps up to basically 502 to 70. That's according to a New York Times estimation. And those superdelegates, we should tell you, they make 15% of all the delegates who vote at the convention. So the nation chooses, these superdelegates can technically vote however they want. That's been controversial.
But when we went into South Carolina and several other states around South Carolina we had back in February, it was 50-50. 51-52, her favor, pledged delegates. But you know how many superdelegates Hillary Clinton had already? 360. According to the Hill, if you look at the superdelegate allocation as of February 15th, it was 360 superdelegates for Hillary Clinton. This is when they're at 51 to 52 in pledged delegates. That's insane that superdelegates were allowed to do that. That superdelegates were allowed to vote that early and that they even exist. They should not exist. Why would you need to create a safeguard against us voting our own candidate in? If we want to vote a variation of Trump in, we should be allowed to do that, just like the Republicans were. So to have the establishment have this kind of power, it's just very problematic. So effectively, she was at 400 and he was at 50 from the start of this whole thing. And what it did is that along the way, it made people on the fence or people that are political followers feel like he didn't have a chance to win. And that's the purpose of the superdelegates, to empower the party establishment. And that's just what they created for. In 1982, let me take you back. The superdelegates were created essentially because of Carter. They were created to keep a populist candidate from winning the Democratic nomination. They said a populist candidate that couldn't win the presidential candidacy, but that's not for them to decide. All we can really look at is that it was to keep a populist candidate from taking the Democratic nomination. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like Bernie Sanders if ever there was a clear indication of who it was meant to keep out? Bernie Sanders and his followers. When you look at Carter's whole campaign, a lot of people don't remember he was an outsider and he ran a campaign against and what he called the political bosses. Very similar, the political bosses. And he passed over party insiders when he actually gave out his appointments. And it was a big issue. A lot of people didn't get to stay in their position. And they didn't want that to happen again. So they created the Superdelegates in 82. And the Superdelegates have never shown more importance / bias than this election. Because what we saw is that through the process, they slanted if not totally changed the voting patterns of the pledge delegates by creating an implication that he could not win and that she was the candidate from the beginning to the end. And so now to say that pledge delegates are she's ahead by that, we need to go by that. We can't, because it affected the whole process. When you look at the overall pie today, she has 520 of the 712 superdelegates today. So she's added 200 more. He only has, I think, like 40 or 50. What superdelegates are? They are governors, mayors, representatives. They are party establishment that has a vote that is way more valued than the individual vote. So if I gave you today's numbers, we have had about, like they said, 20 million people vote, and there's 712 superdelegates. So if you look at that, their vote is worth 7,000, 10,000 votes. But if we go back to before the South Carolina primary, if 360 superdelegates was equal to 52 delegates, the ratio was insane back then. And so I guess my purpose of this video is for you guys to get a grasp on superdelegates and also to understand how superdelegates really decided this Democratic nomination. And if you look at it and you look at the timeline of pledged versus superdelegates from basically February until May today, you can't do nothing but be honest with yourself and see that this was a very, very problematic process this time. Democratic process this time didn't work based on popular vote.